Hello guys, NautoAce here, and I want to give my thoughts on the full list for the Sega Genesis Mini 2. So yes, Sega finally revealed all the games that's going to be on the US version as well the European. However, I'm not going to give my thoughts on the game that they showed because to some extent, a lot of people kind of said, and I can agree, it's a 50-50 situation. Some are going to say it's good, some are bad. Like in the Genesis side, there are some good ones. There are some that never been released or finally getting released in the West. There are even some with quality of life, such as Space Harrier 2 with better frame rates. So, I mean, it is what it is there. While at the same time, the Sega CD part in the West, well, there were some key games that people really wanted it, but as expected, chances are was very slim. A lot of people were disappointed, including myself. So, in that part, it is 50-50. And my thoughts about that one is, it is what it is. I think there's still some great games. Even so, like those minor games not being there, especially on the Sega CD side, it still have a good collection. Overall, it's for everyone. There's a different multiple genre there. However, I want to extend on this by responding to Madlittlepixel and the people who comment on his page, on his two videos, about the Sega Genesis Mini 2 as well with Lady Ace Gamer, because there were more information of why in TVs of why this particular game was not released in the West. So what am I talking about here? So in Japan, there were actually three key games that people were, oh my gosh, that's exciting, I want to play that. And those are Lunar 1, Lunar 2, and Popful Mail. Those are not in the West. So the backstory of those games first is they're very cult classic. I never really played Popful Mail because there was no better version, enhanced version. However, I do have Lunar 1, Lunar 2 for the PlayStation when it first came out, thumbs up, as well as for the PSP, the Lunar remake. And I'm going to tell you, it's way different than the original one. And I'm going to explain later also why that remake sort of significant about it, but like I said, that's going to be a bit later. Like I said, that was in Japan. It did not get released in the West. It's not in the Western version of it. So a lot of people were like, I'm disappointing, it sucked, Sega, you suck, etc. And a lot of people kind of said, why is it? And personally, I kind of agree and kind of like, you know what, it kind of makes sense because there are more than meets the eye. And I was like looking all the situation and I'm putting two together. I'm like, you know what? It kind of makes sense. And that is the reason why Lunar 1, Lunar 2, and Popful Mail was not on the West version of the Genesis Mini 2 is it was published by Working Design. So if you remember that company, if you're old, you're OG, they're one of the best localization team in the past. Unfortunately, in 2005, they were defunct, and I'll explain that later. So they came back as GajinWorks. To some extent, quality-wise, a little bit lower than when it used to be in Working Design. But hey, you know, the person behind it still have a company, still have a job. You get the idea there. So you might say, wait a minute, but isn't that they're just a publishing company? Yes. The developer for Lunar 1 and Lunar 2 are Game Arts, and they're now owned by Gung Ho Entertainment. And then I didn't know about this until now. Popful Mail was actually developed by Nihon Falcom. So the same people who did the Yeast game and the Trail series game, which I enjoyed them. So awesome there. So if you're thinking about the game rights, that's fine. Nothing problem there. But the problem is, especially in the West, you need that translation. And that's the biggest problem. Is that Working Design, as of right now, because it's theirs anyway, so you can't do anything about it, is they own the rights for the translation for Lunar 1, Lunar 2, and Popful Mail. And then you can say, well, what's wrong with that? Why not just put it in there? Well, unfortunately, Victor Ireland, who basically the founder for Working Design, now GajinWorks, let's just say a lot of people think, one, he's sort of not normal to some extent, but not like crazy normal. But let's just say there's some logistic problem there. And to some extent, he's also what some people say, sort of a greedy bastard. So technically what happened is that apparently some insider said, apparently that Sega did consider it at one point, but when they asked about the translation rights, Victor Island said, well, I'm not just going to accept a flat fee payment. You're going to have to pay me royalties. So basically what it means is, damn it, I want more money. So that's where the greedy bastard part there. Apparently this guy wanted a lot of money for his work. I'm like, really? But it's old. It's the Sega CD. And they just need to have permission, and you want more? Like, boy, what a greedy bastard. You're right. It sounds like a greedy bastard, but at the same time, Sega also is being cheapskate. So who's the fault here? Sega or Victor Ireland? Who knows? This is sort of a situation of a 50-50. Again, the reason why Sega did not want to put a lot of money, the idea, whether you're liking or not about this Sega Genesis Mini 2 is, it is a cash grab, whether you like it or not. It's a good quality cash grab, but it is a cash grab because a lot of people said, some insiders said, when they were building this, they were trying to build it as cheap as it may while trying to make a lot of profit out of it. That's the reason. The reason why they're not doing a Saturn Mini or a Dreamcast Mini, because it was going to be too expensive. They even said, be aware that it's going to be very, very less for the Sega Genesis Mini 2 because the pandemic, chip shortage. But also, you got to keep in mind that the first one, good it may be, well, to some extent, it didn't really sell well. It was always on sale once in a while, so you kind of see it there. So, again, it's one of those confidence level, like, well, what if it doesn't sell? I mean, granted, it's going to sell because you got the games there. You got some games that never been released outside of Japan, but to some extent, they still want Lunar 1, 2, and Popful Mail. They didn't. So, again, Victor Ireland, because he wanted more money. Sucky, but it is what it is there. Now, the question is, why is Victor Ireland like that? Why is he like sort of a quote-unquote greedy bastard? So I did say that his company Working Design was defunct 2005. It's because if you read the wiki, I know it kind of like, wow, really wiki, but to some extent there are truth behind it, is that his company was always struggling. There's always some frustration when he's trying to release some game. So when the PlayStation first came out, he wanted to localize some game for the PlayStation. At the time, you got a guy, the late Bernie Stoller. Unfortunately, he did pass away. If you know that guy, he's like the pure American market guy. Everything has to be 3D, American. Anime is not good. Cartoonish is not good. We need something, quote-unquote, manly. So Victor Ireland was having a hard time localizing a lot of the game to a point that he was localizing game for the Sega Saturn. There were some other games, especially the Magic Knight Ray Earth. It was localized by Working Design. And then after a while, the sale for the Sega Saturn declining, and with Bernie Stoller leaving PlayStation during the 32-bit era, then he was starting to make games for the PlayStation. Lunar Complete, Lunar 2 Complete, some other games they did. And there was still some problem, even so they were doing this localization. Case in point was, in order to justify selling this game, because most of them are 2D games, they were asked to do some sort of collectible thing for it. Lunar 1 Complete and Lunar 2 Complete, you can't get them just the game itself. You have to have a collectible value in order to sell them in the MSRP of $50. So that was a problem there because, again, they were 2D. Because at the time, also during the 32-bit era, there was this fictional 2D policy rule, which is if it's 2D, if they deem it's 2D, then the value has to be less. Problem is, JRPG costs a lot of money, so you can't just sell them at less. So they were trying to comply with Sony's policy. You can see there. So from what I understand is, even so those products, those games were selling, Working Design weren't making a lot of money. Again, I don't know if it's true or not. There were a lot of talks about that one. And then comes to the PS2 era, same deal. A lot of the games that Working Design was localizing were to some extent 2D value, even so they're not. The biggest one I remember was Ground Lancer 2 and 3 that Sony told working design, hey, if you want to sell this for $50, you have to combine the two games. And apparently that was undervalued. And yeah, they did not make a lot of money out of it because to some extent it was quote unquote over budget because the localization was costing more. But for two games, you got to sell them for $50. I mean, it isn't unfortunate, but again, working design. Victor Ireland was complying to Sony to a point they went out of business. So that's the reason. My guess of why Victor Ireland sounds like he's a greedy bastard, because a lot of this company, whether it's Sega or Sony, he got screwed, whether you like it or not. He couldn't make games on the PlayStation until late because of Bernie Stolar. And even so when he finally could, they were telling them, well, your games are 2D, so you might want to do a collector's edition to have better value for $50. And the problem is, the development, the localization costs more than what it is. So, but he had to comply with Sega Saturn. From what I understand was that even so there was no policy like in Sony, the games were just not selling because it's a Sega Saturn. People rather play them on the PlayStation. You can see there, especially when the PlayStation 2, during the PlayStation 2 era, you kind of see it. Raw Lancer 1 and 2, kind of like the coffin in the nail, to a point that, yeah, they went out of business, and then he came back as GajinWorks, and now the market, the policies are different. It is what it is there. So, me can see why Victor is sort of a greedy bastard for wanting a lot of money for his translation, even so maybe they're not good quality in the role. He probably was still not happy what happened to him with Sony and with Sega. It could be that he still remembered that and said, hey, Sega, pay me a lot of money if you want this translation on the Sega Genesis Mini 2. Again, whose fault is it? Well, to some extent, mostly I have to go with Victor Ireland for being a greedy bastard. But Sega, to some extent, also are no saint. Again, you have the money. Why not just take that L? If you probably put it in there, a lot of people will probably buy it more. They'll have better positive response to it. Now, the problem is, to some extent, is that the response to the Sega Genesis Mini 2 is, oh, it's not that good. The selection is not good. Just because 3 particular Sega CD cult classic games are not there. Lunar 1, Lunar 2, and Popful Mail. So, yeah, I think that's the reason also that probably why it wasn't there, kind of makes in there. And another one is, like I said, a response and credit to Lady Ace Gamer. She did a video on about Popful Mail, and she played a bit of a clip, and there was a clip, let's just say that the main character there, she kind of said the bad R word there. So in this time of age, you cannot use that word ever. That's a very, very dirty, naughty word, so don't ever use that. But unfortunately, that was like, what, in 1992, 1993. And at a time, that's a norm. Now it's not. So you see the culture there. But beside the point, I know it's a bit political, but that's also probably the other problem. Because she actually said it, and apparently, according to Lady Ace Gamer, the game itself says it twice. So, yeah. So you might say, well, Sega can just modify the game just like the Space Harrier 2. Well, Space Harrier 2 is owned by Sega. Lunar and Popful Mail, not so much. So unless they got permission from Game Arts and Falcom respectively, then no. Well, they can just put their own dub and translation. Okay, why kind of modify a Sega CD game? That costs money. The idea is to basically build it with less cheap parts and sell it to a high profitable price. What he's seeing there. So, yeah, it doesn't kind of make sense there. So, yeah, it's kind of unfortunate there. And that's why, like I said, if you play the PSP version of Lunar 1, a lot of the localization was different because it was localized by Exit. And the voice actors and actresses are way different than the one in, heck, the one different in Sega CD and definitely one in the PlayStation. For people who don't know, the PlayStation 1 version, they actually recast the voice. And now with the PSP version, they recast again because that one has nothing to do with working design. And you might say, well, why not just put that one on the Sega CD? Then it's not a Sega CD. Now it's a PlayStation portable game, which is equivalent to a PlayStation 2, like in power and level in architect. So it kind of doesn't make sense because it's supposed to be the Sega CD version. So that is unfortunate. So he said, suck, we're done. Well, here's something that it could be possible for Sega to do. And that is, if they ever gonna do a Sega Mini Genesis 3 with the 32X, with the Sega CD, whatever, who knows, I don't know what they're gonna do. They're doing it because they need to make some money. They can actually use Lunar 1 and 2 and Popful Mail and redo the script and redo the voices if they're willing to do it. Yeah, that's a possibility, but is it worth their time and money? That's the question. Because the most convenient way is, like I said, using the working design translation. Problem is, Victor Ireland is a greedy bastard. He likes money. He needs a lot of money. And again, I can see why he's had that mentality, because during the 32-bit era and the PS2 era, he kind of got screwed. I mean, what can you do? He got screwed there. So it is what it is. So those are the response to Madlittlepixel and the people that talk about it, and Lady Ace Gamer. Yes, it sucks, but in the perspective with working design and with Victor Ireland, well, you kind of see why this guy has like sort of a money problem mentality, because he got screwed. I mean, you're probably going to have a same mentality also to some extent if that happens. Just saying. I don't know if it's true or not, but it is unfortunate, but it is what it is there. So with that, I'll see you guys later.